What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
Dad leaned back with that steady little grin he wears when he thinks he is being funny and important at the same time, saying that my sister had just bought a car and asking when I would finally catch up. And I felt that familiar heat in my chest that used to push me into defending myself with facts and receipts and a shaky smile. But this time I set my fork down, kept my voice even, and told him that I already had and that I simply did not think he cared enough to notice, and the way the room went quiet was not dramatic or cinematic. It was just the kind of silence that tells you people finally heard the words you have been saying for years, but chose not to hear until it embarrassed them. Megan did the little surprised laugh she always does when she expects applause and wants to smooth the moment with a joke, saying I was being sensitive and that Dad did not mean anything by it, and Mom started clearing plates even though they were not empty. Because that is what she does when she wants to erase tension without addressing it, while Dad stared like I had just spoken a language he never asked me to learn, and I sat there thinking about how many times I have been the quiet one who pays her own bills, shows up on time, keeps promises no one notices, and then gets told she is behind because she does not post her life like a scoreboard. I told him, in that same steady tone, that I was happy for Megan, because a new car can feel like a clean start, especially when the dealer throws in those scented floor mats and the first month's payment looks small enough to pretend the rest will not hurt. And he chuckled and said I would understand someday, and I looked at my sister and asked, casual as a weather question, what rate they gave her and how many dealer add-ons they bundled before the paperwork, since the people at the desk are friendly until you try to remove the packages that pay their bonuses, and she stalled, saying Dad handled it, and Dad said not to worry about rates because he had negotiated like a champ. Which is something he says after every negotiation whether or not he did the math. I did not gloat, and I did not bring up the spreadsheet I made for myself when I bought mine. The one that compares insurance tiers and maintenance timelines and the real cost of extended warranties when you calculate the probability of use over the life of the vehicle. Because I have learned that nothing kills a family moment faster than being the woman who brings numbers to a brag. But I did ask if they remembered the blue envelope I dropped off back in early spring when I said I had errands and left before dessert, because inside was a copy of my title and my insurance card and the key tag from the dealership with my name on it, and I put it in the drawer with the chargers by the phone where Dad keeps his spare batteries, which means it has been sitting there under his nose while he told me every week that I should hurry up and grow up. Megan rolled her eyes and said if I had a car I would have posted it like a normal person, and I told her that I stopped posting anything for family approval when I realized the approvals were never about me. They were about the story Dad liked to tell at parties where I am the slow one who needs a push while she is the star who makes the family look impressive, and I could see the hit land on her face. Not because she is cruel, but because she has always taken the applause without asking where it came from, and for the first time she looked at me like maybe she did not know me at all. Dad muttered that if I had told him, he would have looked it over, and I said I knew he would, which is exactly why I kept it quiet, because I wanted something in my life that he could not sign, could not tweak, could not later point to and claim as his achievement. And I picked up my keys and laid them on the table, letting the dealer tag flap on the ring where the date is stamped clear as day, and he blinked at it like a man who is just realizing the picture on the wall has been crooked for years and he never noticed because he liked the story more than he liked the truth. Mom asked, in that careful voice she uses when she wants peace more than answers, whether I could at least stay for coffee, and I told her I would, because I am not angry the way they think I am. I am just finished playing the part they handed me, and then I asked Dad, still in that calm tone, whether he had kept the copy of my title safe in the drawer, since there is a phone bill tucked under it that he has not paid even though he lectured me about responsibility last week, and while he processed that, Megan asked what model I bought, and I said I would tell them another time, because tonight is not about the car, it is about the fact that I have been standing in the same room with them for years, and they never actually looked. And I could feel the shift happen, small and solid, like a door sliding off its old hinges and settling on new ones that only I can oil. I finished my plate, thanked Mom for cooking, told Megan I hoped her payments were manageable and that if the dealership slipped in the ridiculous nitrogen tire package we could talk about how to get a refund. And then I stood up and said I had an early morning because I was meeting someone to sign something that would finally make a few things official, and I watched Dad swallow his question because he hates being the last to know, and I let him sit with it. Because the best revenge is not a speech or a scene, it is a quiet fact that changes who has the power to define you, and as I walked to the door with my keys in my hand, I knew they would open the drawer after I left, and I knew what they would find, and I knew it was only the first thing they had missed. When I drove home after that dinner, I kept thinking about how easy it has always been for my family to mistake volume for truth and applause for merit, and while the road was familiar and the route automatic, my mind was busy sorting the long list of moments when I learned that being quiet and competent would never be as shiny as being loud and adored. Like the time in high school when I won a regional writing award and Dad patted my shoulder as if I had found a decent coupon while Megan nailed a solo in choir and he told the neighbors that our family was raising a star. Or the time in college when I figured out how to stretch 3 part-time jobs and a stack of scholarships into something that actually covered tuition while Megan called home crying about her meal plan and Mom put money in her account within the hour, telling me later that I had always been the resourceful one and would not mind waiting for help that, of course, never came. There is a particular brand of family story that hardens into a rule the more it gets told, and ours went something like this. Megan is the one who makes us proud, who shows up large, who needs support because great people have great needs, while I am the one who will be fine because I am practical and low maintenance and, if we are being honest, not particularly entertaining, and for a long time I accepted it because pushing for a different role felt like begging, and I made a private promise that I would take care of myself so completely that I would never again have to perform for crumbs of attention that tasted like pity anyway. So when Dad started his Sunday routine of life audits and casual jabs, I recognized an old script, and the reason I did not rise to it is that I spent the last few years building a life that does not require their version of approval, the kind that comes with conditions and reminders and a bill of who gets to brag about what, and if I kept my milestones quiet it was not because I was ashamed or timid, it was because I learned that anything I placed in that house got swallowed by the story they preferred, with my effort repackaged as their guidance and my grit retold as their patience, and somewhere along the way I decided that if they would not see me, then they would feel me, not as a scene, not as a scream, but as a set of decisions that moved the center of gravity back into my hands. I thought about the family phone plan, which I opened under my name years ago because my job's corporate discount made the monthly bill manageable, and I remembered how Dad liked to lecture me about responsibility while paying me back late, if at all, and also how he never minded telling his golf friends that he had negotiated a great rate, and I realized I had been subsidizing the very story that kept me in the role of the person who should be grateful for scraps, which is when I parked the car, made tea, opened my laptop, and initiated a clean transfer of responsibility that would move the lines into his name with a polite 30-day window for acceptance, during which the discount would remain because I am not cruel even when I am done being used, and I set a reminder to cancel my corporate link after that period. Not as revenge for revenge's sake, but as the simplest possible statement of fact that I am no longer the power source for their myth. While the carrier's form churned through its confirmations, I sent a short, measured note to the family group chat. The one that Megan uses to send photos of every compliment ever paid to her, and the one where Dad shares motivational quotes as if he invented persistence. And I wrote that I had started a transfer of the phone lines into his name so that billing and responsibility would match authority, that I would cover the current cycle because I had budgeted for it, and that I would step back after the change completed, and I added one line about how I had also removed my corporate discount from the car insurance bundle that Dad asked me to attach years before. Not to punish anyone, but to avoid the confusion we keep having about who is doing whom a favor, and the read receipts popped up like blinking eyes in a dark room that was suddenly flooded with an unflattering light. Megan typed that I was being dramatic and that this felt petty, and I told her, as calmly as a weather report, that shifting costs back to the people who control the decisions is not petty, it is adult. And if she wanted to keep the exact rate she could speak to the carrier herself, because the rep I just chatted with is very helpful when you do not treat him like a vending machine, and Dad wrote that this was not how families operate. which made me smile in a tired sort of way because families, in his mind, operate like a company where he is the founder and everyone else trades gratitude for exposure, and I wrote back that families also operate on respect. And respect looks like paying for what you use and not belittling the person who negotiated the price. And then I muted the chat because I did not need to watch them cycle through outrage into bargaining into sulking like they always do when the narrative does not bend to their comfort. Taking the plan out of my name did not make me a hero and did not make me cruel. It simply closed a pipeline that siphoned money and dignity in the same direction, and the relief I felt was not fireworks. It was like the click of a lock that finally fits the door it was made for, and as I set the laptop aside, I glanced at the small stack of papers waiting in my bag, the ones an attorney drew up when I decided to grow up on my own terms. And I thought about how Dad had scoffed at the word structure when I tried to explain my plans a year ago, and how tomorrow's appointment would tell a story he could not rewrite with a smirk or a toast, which is why I placed the folder on the table and double-checked the signatures. Because if tonight's shift rattled the picture frames, tomorrow's signature would move the wall behind them, and as the group chat bubbled again with Megan asking whether the transfer would interrupt her service during her weekend trip, I typed a single line saying that the window was generous and the instructions were clear, and I stopped before I told her the part she will discover soon enough, the part that explains why that blue envelope in the charger drawer was only the first thing they missed. When the dust settled after the phone plan transfer, and the silence in the group chat stretched into hours that felt heavier than years of casual dismissal, I realized how long they had been living with an image of me that was comfortable for them, but insulting for me, an image that reduced my life to the caricature of the daughter who could never quite keep up, while Megan sparkled and Dad orchestrated the applause. And I knew that part of the reason they never asked questions about my choices was not because they trusted me, but because they genuinely did not expect my story to be worth hearing. It had become their habit to assume that if something significant happened in my life, they would hear about it through some small trace, maybe a slip in conversation, maybe a receipt left on the counter. And then they would fit that fragment into the larger narrative they had already written, the one where Megan was always advancing and I was always lagging, and for years I allowed that. Because I thought my silence was strength, but over time I came to understand that it was also a kind of complicity, a quiet agreement to let them believe that my worth was small simply because I did not shove it in their faces. The irony, of course, is that the car they bragged about Megan buying with such pride, the shiny symbol Dad waved at Sunday dinner like a badge of her arrival into adulthood, was not really hers in the way they pretended it was. Because while the paperwork bore her name, the down payment came from Dad's account, the insurance premium was tucked under his credit card, and the loan terms were softened by his co-signature. Meaning that Megan was not driving a victory she earned, but rather a trophy. He handed her so he could clap loudly about her independence without ever admitting that her independence was subsidized. Meanwhile, when I purchased mine, I drove to the dealership alone, signed with my own signature, declined the unnecessary add-ons after asking enough questions to make the salesman nervous, wired the funds directly from the savings account I had built paycheck by paycheck, and walked out with a set of keys that represented something no one could take credit for but me, and the reason no one in my family knew was because I learned, painfully, that announcing my achievements in that house was like pouring water into sand. No matter how much you brought, it disappeared without acknowledgement. And it was not just the car. They never asked how I managed to move into my own place without begging for help. They never asked why I no longer mentioned roommates or why the address on my mail had changed, because as long as I showed up on Sundays with a polite smile and no dramatic stories, they assumed I was scraping by in some dim corner of life, just grateful to be invited to the table. The truth was that the small condo with the plain exterior and the quiet street was mine, fully mine, purchased in my name after years of saving and months of paperwork, but to them, I was still the one in need of a push. Still the one who should be thankful for the scraps of attention they tossed me after applauding Megan's newest adventure. I never corrected them, not because I was ashamed, but because I did not feel like giving them the satisfaction of pretending they had anything to do with it, and so I lived in my own space, paid my own mortgage, and kept my keys in a bowl that nobody in my family even knew existed. The deeper I thought about it, the clearer it became that their blindness was not accidental. It was convenient for Dad to believe that I was stumbling, because it allowed him to polish Megan as the crown jewel and cast himself as the heroic father lifting her to greatness. It was convenient for Mom to believe that I needed less, because it allowed her to funnel resources to Megan without guilt, always justifying it with the line that I was resourceful and strong and would make do. And it was convenient for Megan to believe that she was ahead, because it allowed her to preen in the light of their approval while ignoring the shadows of dependence that followed her everywhere. I understood that they all benefited from underestimating me, and that realization hardened something inside me that had been soft for too long. So when Megan texted me midweek, asking in that casual tone whether I could give her a ride because her new car was already in the shop for a warranty issue, I agreed. Not because I wanted to help her, but because I wanted to see how far her self-awareness stretched when confronted with the reality that her independence was already wobbling. As she buckled herself into my passenger seat, her eyes glanced around the interior with the sharp curiosity of someone cataloging details she had not expected to see, and she asked, almost too quickly, when I had gotten a car. And I answered evenly that it had been months, that I had paid outright, and that I had not thought it was worth broadcasting, and the way her face tightened told me that she understood, in that moment, that her story was not the only story worth telling. She muttered something about how I should have shared, how families celebrate each other, and I let her words hang in the air, because what I wanted to say, what I almost did say, was that families also notice without being told, that they ask without being spoon-fed, that they care enough to look past the surface, and if ours did not, maybe that said more about them than it did about me. I drove her to the service center, dropped her off, and when she thanked me, I simply nodded, because the point had already been made. The truth they never saw coming was that I had stopped waiting for their recognition, and by the time they realized how much I had built without them, it would be too late to take ownership of it. And while they were still rehearsing their favorite lines about Megan's victories, I was quietly rewriting the ending of the story they thought they controlled. And as I drove home alone, the weight of their silence heavier than any words they could have thrown, I knew that this was only the beginning, because the car was just the surface of what they had missed, and the deeper truths, the ones tied up in paperwork, signatures, and decisions that could not be undone, were waiting for the right moment to surface, and when they did, no smirk or applause would be able to cover the sound of the narrative breaking apart. By the time the service center called Megan to pick up her car, and she texted me a breezy thank you with a row of exclamation points that I chose to ignore, I had already met with the attorney, confirmed the final filings, and scheduled the courier. Because while my family thought the car and the phone plan were the entire story, the real move had been sitting quietly in a manila folder for months waiting for the exact moment when their confidence would be high and their guard would be low. Which is why I walked into that meeting calm and clear and signed the last set of pages that transferred the property on Brookside, the cute 2-unit place where Megan had been living on a family discount that was never written down because Dad's friend handled it like a favor, into the name of my small holding company. A boring little entity that does not post photos or argue in group chats, but does, with perfect politeness, issue leases, collect rent, and set boundaries that people cannot talk over. I am not a villain, and I am not interested in humiliation for sport, so before anyone starts clutching their pearls about sisters and mercy, let me say that I structured what happens next in a way that is firm and fair. Because I am not trying to make Megan suffer, I am trying to end a pattern where my work props up her image while Dad narrates over my life like a sports commentator who never learned my name. And the cleanest way to do that is to make the math honest and the paper real, which is why the envelope Megan received the next afternoon contained a straightforward lease at a rate that sits right at the low end of market, a security deposit that equals 1 month's rent instead of the 0 she has paid for years. A clear clause that removes Dad as an unofficial guarantor because there never should have been one, and a long transition window that gives her time to breathe and plan, along with a friendly option to lock in an even lower rate if she sets up autopay and agrees to handle her own utilities without calling me at midnight like I am a switchboard. Before I mailed it, I called the current owner, the The same friend of Dad's who liked to tell me I had a good head on my shoulders while charging me full price on every repair I ever asked him to quote. And I thanked him for the quiet sale and for honoring his word about keeping my name out of the neighborhood gossip, and he laughed that half-apologetic laugh men use when they realized the quiet one at the table was actually the buyer. Then said that Dad would be surprised but fine, which told me everything I needed to know about the hierarchy that has always run our family, because of course he assumed Dad would be fine once he understood that control had simply jumped from one man to another. And I did not correct him because there was no point in explaining that the whole point of this move was to show that the ownership did not report to their approval anymore. When the courier confirmed delivery, I knew it would not be the paper that upset them, it would be the sender, because the company name printed at the top was not some stranger's trust or an uncle's shell. It was my little entity with a bland Midwestern title that meant nothing until you checked the state registry and saw my name on it, and I pictured Megan standing in her kitchen reading the lines that laid out payment dates and late fees and repair protocols. And I pictured the exact second when her eyes would catch the ownership line and her face would do that small twitch it does when reality rewrites itself in front of her, and I felt a long, steady calm settle in my chest, not because I enjoyed the power but because, for the first time, power was not a story being told about me but a structure I had built that could stand without me in the room. I knew, of course, that the phone would ring, and when it did, Dad launched into a lecture about families and generosity and how you do not blindside your sister, and I let him wind himself up. Then I told him that what blindsides a person is not a lease with fair terms and a long runway. What blindsides a person is years of being told she is behind while quietly paying the bills that make everyone else look like they are ahead. And that if he wanted Megan to keep living there for free, he could write me a check each month like any normal guarantor, though I suggested he skip that arrangement because the interest in learning adulthood goes up when the overdraft fees are his and not mine, and after a long silence, he said I was being cold. And I said I was being clear, and that clarity feels like cold to people who have been warmed by someone else's labor for too long. I ended the call before the insults arrived, because I am done auditioning for a kinder version of the story they like to tell, and then I drafted a brief email to Megan that did not gloat or threaten or apologize. It simply summarized the lease, repeated the reduced rate option if she handled her own logistics like an adult, and offered a meeting to walk through the basics so she would never feel ambushed by a maintenance issue again, and I hit send, closed my laptop, and sat with the quiet that followed. A quiet that did not feel like exile anymore. It felt like control, and I told myself that if they wanted to turn this into a spectacle, that would be their choice, but if they wanted to grow up, I had just handed them the manual in plain language. An hour later a text from Megan arrived that looked polite on the surface, but had the usual sting in the middle, asking if this was some kind of punishment and whether I planned to evict her if she did not sign. And I stared at the screen and decided against the paragraphs I could have written about fairness and history and discounts that were never meant to be permanent. And instead, I replied with one long line that said she had 60 days before the old arrangement expired, that signing secured a better rate than she would find anywhere else, and that I would hold the door open for a careful conversation if she wanted to try something new, something called equal footing, and after I hit send I saw the typing bubble appear, disappear, and appear again. And I realized the first crack in their confidence was not going to close, because what I had put on paper was not a threat, it was a mirror, and what it reflected could not be argued away at Sunday dinner, which is exactly why. Before going to bed, I put a smaller envelope in my bag, one addressed to Dad, one that contained a single page and one sentence that he would not understand until he read it twice, a sentence that would make everything that came next impossible to laugh off. The envelope I slipped into my bag the night I sent Megan her lease was thin and light and looked unimportant in that deceptive way paperwork does when the ink is new and the meaning is heavy. And when I handed it to Dad 2 mornings later on the porch where he likes to stand and perform authority with a coffee he never finishes, he snorted and held it like it might contain an apology he could wave around after dinner. But as he read the single sentence printed in plain type, the one that stated that the deed to the family house had been recorded as a life estate for Mom with a transfer on death to me, and that any encumbrance, refinance, or sale would require both our signatures effective immediately. A flush crawled up his neck and settled in his jaw, and for the first time in years he did not have a comeback, because there is no clever line fast enough to outrun a county stamp, and there is no smirk strong enough to bend a recorded instrument back into a story. He looked at me like I had stolen something that belonged to him, and I told him, without raising my voice or apologizing for the steadiness in it, that nothing had been stolen and nothing had been taken from him that he had a right to. Because the roof over Mom's head is not a trophy to be leveraged for bragging rights or a slush fund for Megan's next upgrade, and if he wanted to argue with someone, he should start by arguing with the math and the law, which have less patience for favoritism than I do. He asked when I had convinced Mom to do this, and I said the word convinced was wrong, that I had shown her the stack of bills I have quietly covered and the pattern of transfers he has quietly made, that I had laid out the reality of what would happen if he decided to treat the house like a bank for the rest of his retirement while calling it generosity, and that she, being the one who sleeps under that roof and keeps its lights on and cleans its corners while being told that the most important job in this family is cheering for Megan's newest milestone, had signed her name with a steady hand and asked me to make sure the papers were correct, and yes, the attorney reviewed it twice, and yes, the title company confirmed the chain, and no, I did not need his approval because, as he has loved reminding me since I was a teenager, adulthood means taking responsibility for your choices, and mine includes protecting the only person in that house who has ever tried to keep peace, without pretending that silence is fairness. He said I had cut him out of his own home, and I said he was still in it and would be in it as long as he chose to be a husband rather than a ringmaster, that nothing in those papers removed him from the table or from the memories he cares to polish. What they removed was the ease with which he could use the house to prop up a performance where Megan's wants are renamed needs and my contributions are renamed help, because from now on, if he wants to posture about who carries the family name and who makes him proud, he will have to do it without mortgaging Mom's safety or my patience, and if he wants to make a decision about the property, he will have to look me in the eye and ask like a peer rather than bark like a foreman. He started to say families do not operate with documents, and I told him families that refuse documents often do so because documents force the truth to sit at the table. Megan called while he was still reading the sentence for the third time, and I let it ring, because her timing has always been a chorus to his melody, and I did not plan to conduct them anymore, and when she texted moments later to demand whether I was really doing this to her, I replied that I was not doing anything to her at all, that I had given her a fair lease with a better rate than she would find in any other neighborhood that treats grown people like grown people, that she had 60 days to decide whether she wanted the adult version of independence or the child's version of applause, and that, for the record, the house they love to use as stage lighting for her victories would not be funding any new acts. She shot back that I was jealous. And I smiled without joy because jealousy is the word people reach for when the free part of their life gets moved to the full-price shelf, and then I put my phone face down and told Dad that if he wanted to talk like a man who listens, I had time, but if he wanted to perform, he could schedule a date and sell tickets to his friends at the club. He did not apologize, and I did not expect him to, but he sat down hard, and the sound of the chair scraping the porch boards felt like a curtain falling, not because I had won some dramatic scene, but because the play was over, and what remained was the quiet, boring work of living with boundaries that hum rather than shout. I told him the phone plan transfer would finalize next week and that the insurance discounts were already unbundled. I told him I would not be at Sunday dinner until the jokes about catching up were dead and buried. I told him I wished Megan luck with the lease and would answer her questions about utilities and repairs with the same professionalism any other tenant receives. And then I told him, gently but without backing down, that what I had wanted all along was not a throne or a parade, but a seat that did not wobble under me every time he wanted to elevate my sister, and that since they would not hand me one, I built it. He asked whether I hated him, and I said no, that I had simply stopped worshipping a version of him that only existed when I was small and eager and willing to trade self-respect for a pat on the head, and that if he wanted to meet the adult I actually am, he knew where to find me, preferably not with an audience. I stood, told him Mom had a copy of everything and that she could share it if he lost his, and as I walked down the steps he called my name and told me I had made my point, and I turned and said the point was not mine anymore. The point was the paper, the keys, the payments, the structure, and the silence that follows when people who have talked over you for years finally have to sit with the truth they cannot narrate into something cute. I got into my car, the one I bought without their help, and I drove away knowing that whether or not they ever clap for me is irrelevant, because the applause has been replaced by terms none of us can ignore, and that, more than any speech I could deliver, is the final move that ends the show and starts the life I was always going to live.